as of right now.
Okay.
Well, thank you for joining me, Todd.
Yeah, sure.
But like I said, this was for it's the Rainbow Bridge Monument Valley, the Onward Project, uh, which is dealing with Rainbow Bridge and Monument Valley and the expedition that was going out there, the first expedition, uh, which your book kind of covers that area perfectly. Uh,
Sometimes.
yeah, sometimes, which I have my copy here. Jacob Hamlin, Explorer and Indian Missionary, A Frontier Life, which is quite the book. And every time I go back and read through it, I always find something new through it. But I was hoping that I could talk to you about Wounded Smith. Um, if you want, could you give us a recap of the story?
Okay. And by the way, I should say that I met Corey by running across something he'd written on the internet, and I found out he'd written his master's thesis um, uh,
You,
on related things. You know, it was a lot about the central was about the death of Lot Smith, right, and how that had happened and the conflicts there behind that.
the colonization of Arizona across the Colorado River. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, which involved Lot Smith and his death and the uh, the consequences and of that and how that affected the Navajos and still does to this day.
Huh. So you were dealing with even some of the same characters I was interested in,
Yeah,
and so when I finally got your master's thesis, that was a great step forward for me. So I'm thrilled that you like kind of like the Jacob Hamlin book.
yeah, definitely.
Okay, so Wounded Smith. Um,
1874.
yeah. So this came after a long period of conflict where um, there were kind of, you could call it Navajo Mormon War in southern Utah,
Yeah,
and that had kind of been resolved through um, partially through Jacob Hamlin and partially, I think, through uh, Navajos who wanted to tamp down on any raiding. Like the one I'm interested in most is, uh, correct me, Sony Hosteen, um, Ganado Mucho.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so he comes in the aftermath of this story. But what happened was in December of 1874, a group of four Navajos, and I believe they came from, like families that were very well known, um, and they were kind of from the area of um, Navajo Mountain.
yeah.
And yeah, you can correct me as we go along. Anyway, they went on a trading trip up north to kind of like central southern Utah. It's a place called Grass Valley,
Yeah,
and um, there was there were the Utes were camped there, and they had arranged they had friends in this group of Utes. Okay, but there was also a rancher named McCarty, and uh, he provided meat and cattle to for a
The
fort.
army. Yeah.
Yeah, where was it? Beaver, Fort and Beaver,
Yeah.
somewhere close to there.
Somewhere right around there.
Yeah, and so as these Navajos came up with a lot of stuff to trade, beautiful blankets and typical things they traded, um, and horses. Um, they, the McCarty people got interested in them and were kind of following them. And anyway, but they did get up to the Utes who were their friends, and they made good good trades. And then they were on their way home, and there was a big snowstorm, and they took shelter in kind of an abandoned cabin, and were running out of food. And to stave off starvation, they killed a cattle that was near, uh, that was part of the McCarty herds. And one thing we should say is McCarty was known for hating Indians. It was like he was kind of like, his attitude is the only good Indian is a dead Indian.
Yeah.
So this was his perspective coming into it. And so then at this point, there's a lot of conflicting testimony, and you have to realize that so much of it is coming right from McCarty and the people
Yeah.
with McCarty. In other words, they were trying to make things look good from their perspective. And
Sure.
and so I believe they were planning on killing these Navajos and taking the goods they had traded for. And so there was some meeting with the McCartys, and violence took place, and the Navajos just jumped on the nearest horses to get away. Some were shot, and then some of the Navajos tried to get away on horses, um, and Wounded Smith was the one out in front, and the others were killed. And Wounded Smith and was able to escape. And it was an incredible feat of survival, that he went and hid in forests, and the McCartys were coming after him. They didn't want any witnesses, obviously.
Yeah.
And he was able to hide himself, and then he was wounded too. And then he was able to kind of treat himself as he went south. And the Navajos, uh, um, the Navajos thought it was Mormons attacking them, when actually it was the McCartys who were non-Mormons. And the McCartys were, they ended up as bandits. They ended up as criminals.
And they had some pretty infamous friends.
Yeah, yeah. They kind of brought Butch Cassidy into the criminal world.
Yeah.
And so anyway, incredible feat of survival that Wounded Smith made it. So there were Mormon houses, there were Mormon villages he could have gone to, but he thought that Mormons had attacked him.
Yeah.
And so he just stayed by himself. And so he had to, go down into the Grand Canyon, or the canyon leading up to the Grand Canyon, and he had to get across. And it's very, very, all this is very, very difficult if you've got a good horse, and he had nothing. So he somehow dragged himself across the Colorado River and made it to the southern part of, northern part of Arizona.
Yeah.
And the families of these four Navajos were looking for them, and they used some kind of one of the shamans looked, using his religious practices, he figured out that Wounded Smith was was alive and that he was there and not far off, and they went and found him, and so he survived.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful thing. And however, he wanted to start a war against the Mormons. Okay, and so there's a whole nother story after this, and that's where Jacob Hamlin got involved,
Yeah.
and Ganalamucha Totsoni Hastin, however you say his name. So that's a basic background, and at every step of the way, there's conflicting stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And plus, most of the stories that the McCartys told were lies. So, however, there were some, there was one Navajo survivor to tell the story from his point of view, which is great. Though his, what he said, like his oral history, I don't think it was taken down and put into writing, but the traditions were very powerful among the Navajos, weren't they?
Yeah. So I know there's at least 2 or 3 descendants who shared their version of the story of what happened. I think the more popular one is published in the Navajo Community College's book. I think that's the Long Walk book, if I remember right. But I know Wounded Smith, one of the women he married was a relative of mine. So it goes me, my dad, my grandpa, his mom, which would be my great grandma, her dad, which would be my great great grandpa, and his dad, which if you translate his name, it's like he has a spread out mustache. He's a pretty influential person for the Navajo Mountain area. And he had several wives. I come from the first wife, but through his second wife, if I remember right, from his second wife, one of his daughters married Wounded Smith. And so that's how I'm related to him. And I've tried to go back into the genealogical aspect of to look at his kids and the offsprings and whatnot, and I've been able to narrow down quite a few people, but I haven't talked to anybody specifically about Wounded Smith. But I think that would be pretty interesting to see. To talk to them about, their stories about their grandfather or great grandfather, Wounded Smith.
Yeah, that would
whatnot.
be great. Mm-hmm. Now, how is he connected with who was it, White Man Killer?
Mm-hmm.
How is he connected with that story?
So White Man Killer is he's not directly related to White Man Killer.
Okay.
But that would be my third great grandpa.
Okay.
And he was living down towards Tuba City area, Moncopie area, while Wounded Smith and his father-in-law were up by Navajo Mountain area. But yeah, because White Man Killer, he's spending part of the time down in Tuba City and part of the time around the Navajo Mountain area, and it's not until Lot Smith dies and before he ends up staying up at Navajo Mountain for the most part.
Okay.
And his family ends up staying up there, but he ends up going back to the Tuba City area and staying down there. And that's a whole another story by itself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all of these are intertwining stories, aren't they?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the other one, I thought you mentioned his name. I thought you might ask about him, Spain Shanks.
Yep.
So I read over everything I'd written about Spain Shanks, and it was like, whoa, did I write this? I'd forgotten so much. So this was a great occasion for me to remind myself about his whole story.
Yeah. So he's related to White Man Killer. So that would be his dad, White Man Killer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things I found, let me just give a little background on him. When the Mormons started crossing the Colorado River, and they were at first interested in the Hopis, but then they came to have friendships with Navajos too. One of the leading Navajo leaders was someone they called Spain Shanks, and they call
Yeah.
them all different kinds of variations of that. One is Spanish Yank.
Yeah.
And he became very friendly with Jacob Hamblin, and Jacob Hamblin considered him like a convert. He was very interested in, Jacob Hamblin liked to sit around and talk about the last days, all the crazy things that were going to happen, and Spain
Yeah.
Shanks liked to do that too. And Spain Shanks married a Paiute woman and moved up kind of toward Kanab in southern Utah. And for one source said that his family didn't like him doing that, so he was kind of cast out for a while.
Yeah.
And so he had children, up in that area, and that's another way the Mormons would have run into him.
Yeah.
And so one of his daughters, it came time where he maybe his wife died, and he was left with his daughter
and son.
was like, and a son.
Yeah.
Okay. And the daughter was like 7 years old, and he left the daughter with Ira Hatch.
Yeah.
Who's one of the great friends of Jacob Hamblin, another Indian missionary. And Ira Hatch gave it to another Mormon family to raise, gave her to another Mormon family to raise. She was called Sarah. But then later, Ira Hatch married her.
Yeah.
And had a big family, and it was a very successful, close marriage. And eventually she died, and it was brutal for Ira Hatch. He had gotten so close to her. But one of the interesting things about Spain Shanks is he was the leader in his group. But as he got older, other members of the group became leaders, including his son, and they had totally different, views of the Mormons, and they were not friendly with the Mormons often, and they were involved in some of the raiding in these Mormon wars I talked about. And after the Berry murders, one Navajo corpse was left there, and one of the Mormons said it was Spain Shanks.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a complex story, but I think it was his sons who changed his whole policy, and he never would have, pursued that policy, but his sons did.
With I'm trying to remember the author, a descendant of Ira Hatch, wrote a book about marabouts.
Yeah. And a book about Ira Hatch too, right?
Yeah. This is the picture that they claimed was marabouts or Sarah, which is a picture in the Utah State Historical Society's archives, which is they list her. They don't identify the name of this picture. They just state that it's a Ute. But according to the Hatch family, that's supposed to be Sarah.
The little baby or the mother?
The mother.
The mother. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a wonderful picture of the Hatch family.
Yeah.
Later.
The husband and the kids.
Yeah.
And the next wife, if I remember right.
Yeah, and his next wife was just a Mormon, regular Mormon, boring, regular Mormon. And
there's this, and I'll have to look up to see who took the picture. But this was claimed to be Spain Shanks.
There's a really interesting description of him in my book that I'd forgotten until I was reading it today.
Yeah.
And one of the Mormons said he was a stout fellow with a really big head.
Yeah.
So it would be great to have a picture of his whole his whole body to check that.
I know looking at the son, because I've done the DNA testing to go along with genealogical work, and I've come across descendants, relatives of Spain Shank's son's descendants. And I've been able to verify, stories and people and whatnot. But the only thing that I have not been able to verify through DNA is the sister, Sarah, which I thought was interesting.
Would you be able to do it through descendants of Ira Hatch?
Yeah, should be able to. And nothing. Which is one of two things. None of the descendants of Sarah's Ira Hatch relationships have taken the DNA test, or were not related.
Okay.
But who knows?
I know Ira Hatch's. I know a little bit about the children of Ira Hatch, and some of them came down onto the Navajo reservation and were traders there.
Yeah, they went towards New Mexico.
Yeah, and claimed some kind of rights as Navajos, through their background with Spain Shanks, though they were half white and half Navajo and half Paiute, right?
Yeah. So it would be what, a quarter Paiute, quarter Navajo, and half white.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went through the Navajo Nation petitioning that they were Navajo, and I think they eventually won their petition, and which allowed them to do whatever they were planning on doing. I don't remember what they were hoping to gain from that, other than the recognition of being Navajo.
Maybe they had the right to, to have land or something. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
But I know the son has had quite the impact with afterwards with the Mormons wanting
so
to
is the
go,
son Pio Khan? Is that who you're talking about?
yeah,
Okay.
who's trying to go to the Hole in the Rock area. And he's the one that blocks them from going through northern Arizona.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes them have to reevaluate and end up going through the canyons and everything to go straight across Utah, which everyone has their, because of it, now everyone has their wonderful stories to share about the hardships of that.
Now, I noticed that, one of the earliest attempts to settle in San Juan County was, what was it called? The Elkhorn Mission,
The
um,
Elk Mountain,
Elk Mountain Mission.
yeah.
And they were there for a while, and they had conflicts with Utes, and finally they retreated.
Yeah.
Okay. And but according to some traditions, Spain-Shanks was there, and he
Oh,
was helping the Mormons at that point. So he had a long tradition of friendship with Mormons and
yes,
whites.
he tried to help them quite a bit. But I think part of the kind of got sour over time, uh, especially with the attack on Wounded Smith and some of the other hardships that they were going through that in part was caused by the Mormons. Um, yeah,
Yeah, well, that's another big story of my book about how the Mormons came, and you know were very idealistic about converting Indians because of the religious background. But when they got down into the territory that the Indians was theirs, they, as we were talking about, they take over choice water spots, and take over grasslands for their cattle, and the cattle destroy the grass. That the Paiutes would the Paiutes lived on that grass at certain times of the year.
yeah.
So you always have this kind of thing happening with Mormons coming in.
I think I told you last time, I always tease um, the church when it's Pioneer Day. Everyone wants to share their pioneer story, and they said, well, I can come in and share my pioneer story because it goes back to the 1854, when Jacob Hamlin crosses and meets up with Spain Shanks. But they just laugh and think I'm joking. But I think they finally got to the point where they decided not to share any more testimonies about their ancestors, which is fine either way. But I
Yeah.
thought it was funny to tease them about it. But yeah, and I know your book. I really enjoy your book because of all the amount of research that you put into it, especially with the Wounded Smith stuff. There was a lot of stuff that I hadn't seen before as far as the sources that you were using in it, which I thought was pretty cool. Because I know there was a lot of confusion about what exactly happened with it and who exactly the McCartys were and everything. And I'm trying to remember, did they also hang out with Matt Warner?
you know, Off the top of my head, I don't remember that, but they might have. but they were in up to their necks in wrestling
yeah,
and you know and um, and holding up trains and things like that too.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, these guys were no Boy Scouts; they were hardened criminals, and so that's the kind of people you're dealing with the Grass Valley Massacre.
Yeah. There's there's this one time forever ago when I was working on my thesis. Um, we were my wife and my boy, who was just a young kid, decided to take a break and go up to the local water park. Um, and While we got there, we're walking through the water park, trying to decide where we're going to go first and where we're going to set up base camp. So um, we're looking around, and I look up, and there's all these cabanas all over. And on one of the cabanas is this huge sign that says the Locksmith Family Reunion. And I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's the same locksmith that I'm writing about.
I'm sure it was, wasn't it?
Well,
It must have been.
I had the bright idea. Why don't I go and ask? So I went and asked, and I was just like, I'm not quite too sure how to put this, but I think, I asked them, is this the locksmith, the same locksmith I'm thinking of? And they're like, yeah. I'm not sure how to put this, but yeah, my relative killed your relative. And
It was a long time ago, though.
yeah, and I actually found the lady and her husband's account online. It says the lady, she goes, now the other shock of the day I happened as her husband and I were talking at the cabana at the pool. My tag said locksmith, as well as the cabana had a sign. A clean-cut Navajo young man with his little baby and wife stepped up and asked if we were the locksmith family, and I said yes. He was my grandfather. The man, whose name is Corey Smallcanyon, said, well, my great-grandfather shot locksmith. What an opener. We talked a while, and he lives in Provo and is in graduate school. The incident of locksmith has sent him to all the history papers. There's nothing written that he has not read. Her husband told him, you're lucky you didn't run into the less liberal of our family members. They would have drowned you. And we ended up talking about, they wanted to know my point of view of what happened. And like a lot of people, their stories of their ancestor locksmith is usually portrayed in a positive aspect of what happened, without really wanting to look at the actual events of what happened and the the outcome that because of it. But yeah, it was interesting to be there with them.
Well, while we're on talking about the early days of your writing that master's thesis, tell me a little bit about how you came to write that master's thesis. What led you to do it? Was it like this story was very important in your family and you just wanted to research it?
To be honest, I never heard of the story.
Huh.
And there was a professor at BYU that taught Navajo genealogy, and that got me really interested in researching things out, because I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And the further and further I got into it, the deeper I got into uncovering things, and I ran into this guy, White Man Killer, and I started finding the stories that the Locksmith descendants have written and published about him and how he died and everything. And but when I started going to find actual sources about the story, uh, the actual sources differed completely from the Locksmith family. So I decided to start from there, and it just started to balloon after that. I knew that I would have to talk about the Mormons going into northern Arizona, um, but um, and from there I started to notice that uh, the colonization of Tuba City, which is the first colony of the church south of the Colorado River, how that was first established differed depending on who's telling the story. Because you had the church's point of view of how things started, then you had the Navajo point of view of how things started, and then you had the Hopi's point of view because they're right there, the Hopi Indians, and then you had the federal government's point of view of how Tuba City established. And sometimes the stories between all four of these guys, uh, you know, were in sync, but there were a lot of times that they weren't in sync with one another. And so, you know, that's when you have to dig a little bit deeper to see what was going on. And there wasn't really a clear picture of what happened. Um, but when things led up to the Locksmith story of him dying, uh, I started to piece together what that meant for the Navajos because of all of that. Because it's basically a fight for water and land rights between the Navajos and the Mormons. The Mormons weren't even supposed to be there. They were supposed to just be guests temporarily, but they ended up taking over the area and started pushing the Hopis and the Navajos out of the way. And, you know, there were a lot of complaints to the federal government about what was going on. And then the death of Locksmith happened, which was a huge event for northern Arizona, but also for the church, because here he is supposed to lead this colonization effort on behalf of the church, and he's the local ecclesiastical leader, and you know, he's this famed, you know, Utah War veteran. He's also, you know, served as a sheriff up in northern Utah, and just all these other things that brought his death to the forefront of everything. But the conflict, because of him and everything, and plus the government's not liking the church, allowed the government to come in and expand the Navajo reservation, or not the Navajo reservation, the Indian reservation, because they're not going to be very clear in their wording with this expansion, which leads to the Navajo Hopi land dispute, which is a huge event. But eventually things get worked out with that to where Tuba City falls under the Indian reservation, which then allows the federal government some teeth in enforcing laws as far as now this is federal land, we're the federal government, Mormons have to move and get out of Tuba City in the area.
Mhm.
And a lot of them go back to Utah. Some of them go down to Mexico, and some of them go to New Mexico. But that also leads into water right issues that the tribe is still dealing with today too. And people are still arguing about the Navajo Hopi land dispute issues, even though the federal government's tried to clear that all up. But yeah, it was just a big mess because
So all of a sudden you were dealing with all this.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And on top of that, you had the Lot Smith family begging the federal government to send the U.S. Army out to come help track down whoever killed their father because they weren't quite too sure. And the so-called eyewitnesses to the event, it was found out that they weren't actually eyewitnesses. And the Lot Smith family got pretty upset when the Army just sent out one man to go investigate. They didn't send the Army. And he actually interviewed White Man Killer. So there's a partial interview that I think is really awesome of that. And part of the interview, this guy from the military asks, will you go to court to stand trial for what happened? And White Man Killers is all, I will, as long as I get a fair trial. And the Army guys is like, well, why don't you think you're going to get a fair trial? He goes, because I'm an Indian. But the Army guy tried to go find out to see what would happen to help him receive a fair trial, and took a little too long, so my grandpa just took off.
Yeah, I think that was a good decision.
Yeah. He eventually ended up turning himself in years later. And that's right after Flagstaff finished the courthouse. And it just so happens that he's sitting in court with a public defender. And I found out who the public defender was just recently. I have his name written down somewhere. I'll have to find it. And I want to go look into see if he has any paperwork or documents stored anywhere, which I think
yeah.
is interesting. But it just so happens, out of dumb luck, this defender is working on a separate case. And on this separate case that has nothing to do with my family, they're going through the jury selections, and they find out that one of the jurors is a Mormon from one of the Mexico colonies who denounced his U.S. citizenship. So here you have this Mormon colonizer from Mexico who now has a Mexican citizenship and denounced his U.S. citizenship, sitting on a U.S. jury for this separate case. And the public defender who was helping my grandpa was just like, what's going on here? And was able to take that back to my White Man Killers court case and said, we have the same juror on our case. I just found out he shouldn't even be in the jury. As a result, this has to be a mistrial because he's not getting a fair trial here from his peers and whatnot. And the judge agreed that the court case had to be thrown out, but he said, even though I'm going to throw this out, I believe that White Man Killer killed Locksmith in self-defense. And so you're free to go.
So now, with your thesis, who is your leading, what do they call the chair of your leading faculty member who guided you? Who was it?
Jay Buckley.
How was he?
He was wonderful. He is an American West historian.
Mm-hmm.
He's taught a lot of Native classes at BYU. Your typical U.S. American history classes also. He's also done a lot of stuff on Lewis and Clark. One of the books he wrote was about Clark's time as working with the natives, superintendent of Indian Affairs type position. But yeah, he's quite well known among the Lewis and Clark people. So, and I know he helps out right now with the Driven to Teach. Teachers go out and tour historical areas, and he, like as far as like a mid-school, high school, and whatever else, teachers.
So he was really supportive of your thesis, right?
Oh yeah, he was behind
That's
it
great.
100%. I also had Jay Buckley, or not Jay, Brian Cannon.
Oh, I know Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, he was
very nice guy. Yeah,
he was part of that too. I love him and his work with the Red Center at BYU. But he's done a lot of work himself on a number of things.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. But yeah, and the other person was Grant Underwood, who is more of a Mormon historian. So I had Jay Buckley as the Native aspect, Brian Cannon as the American. Sorry. The U.S. history, and then Grant Underwood as the Mormon history professors, just to get a roundabout inclusion of everybody, since that's basically what my thesis was covering.
Yeah, that's a good group. Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been good. I know I've been asked multiple times to clean up my thesis and add some more stuff to get it published, but I've been dragging my feet.
Yeah, you need to do that. Yeah, that's a great, it's a great resource. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'd like to take some time to do that, especially when I finding like I said, I found someone who said they know where the bodies from the 1874 attack of Wounded Smith are supposed to be, and like I said, finding this defender for my grandpa to see if there's anything else, and just other little things. I've looked into because part of the church's interest in going into northern Arizona was because of the Hopis being the quote unquote
Mhm.
civilized tribe and wanting to look into that.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
but there's also the rumors and of the Welsh Indians, and maybe it's the
Right.
Hopis, and I know I found some stuff looking into some of the Welsh papers, uh, newspaper stuff, um, looking into why they're going down and what they're doing a little bit more in detail than I.
Yeah, in that first trip to the across the Colorado that Jacob Hamlin led, they obviously they had to have someone who spoke Spanish
Yeah,
because often the Indians down there could speak Spanish. And
yeah,
so Ammon Tenney, who was just like 13 years old,
yeah,
went on that incredible survival, jaunt and survived it because
yeah.
he could speak Spanish. But they also wanted someone who could speak Welsh.
Well, yep, yep,
It seems crazy to us now, but they kind
yeah,
of thought the Hopis might be the lost tribe or something.
yeah,
And so they had a Welsh speaker with them.
yeah.
And
The
they worked at that for a while. They tried to get the two languages, to come together, but they really couldn't. So they
yeah,
had to drop that idea,
yeah,
that theory.
yeah. Well, what are you currently working on right now?
Oh well, I got interested in Sony Hosteen, Ganado Mucho,
Yeah, yeah,
and as I was writing, the Hamlin book, I got a lot of these Indians I wrote about. Um, I thought, I'd like to spend more time and really, pursue them with more, like with me, I was pursuing Jacob Hamlin as my center of research, and and talking about these other people as they came into his life. And I thought some of these Indians were so interesting; it would be great to research them, for themselves.
yeah,
Spain Shanks is one who would be like that,
yeah,
and but Ganado Mucho was another. So I've been working on Ganado Mucho, and I that paper I sent to you on chief um, chief leaders of the Navajos.
yeah,
It's kind of a spin-off of my research on Ganado Mucho. So that's my big thing I got interested in. And I don't know exactly where that'll lead, maybe some papers for a while.
yeah,
But right now I'm also working on a kind of a sequel to my book on early Mormon polygamy in Nauvoo with Joseph Smith.
I
And
think
it's,
you
yeah,
should look into the polygamy with native wives.
oh, yeah,
And
that's
you kind
very
of talk
interesting.
about that with Hamlin. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
because I know
yeah, that's
church
very interesting.
Brigham
Yeah.
Young came out and was trying to encourage it, but a lot of people didn't want to.
Well, I'll tell you the story of Ira Hatch, which you probably know, but maybe some of the audience won't know. But what happened was either Brigham Young met Sarah, they called her Sarah Maraboots, didn't they?
Yeah,
And knew she had this link with Ira Hatch.
yeah,
And so Brigham Young sent one of his uh, he was an apostle or something, sent him down to southern Utah and said, I want Ira Hatch to marry Sarah. And so this apostle came, and it was like, came to where Ira Hatch was living. It was like the middle of the night. And he said, Brigham Young has told me you're supposed to marry Sarah.
yeah,
And Ira said, okay, maybe we'll talk to her in the morning. And this apostle said, sorry, I'm in a rush. I've got to leave, in 15 minutes. So it has to be right now.
Yeah.
So they woke up this poor young woman and said, you're supposed to marry Ira Hatch and you have to do it right now. And she was like, couldn't we talk about this in the morning? And they said, oh, no, the apostle's here now and he's moving on. So,
And
so
I
she said,
believe
okay, okay. And
she was
so,
pretty young too. She was
yeah,
14-ish.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's how she married Ira Hatch.
Yeah.
And other people weren't interested in doing it that way. And
Yeah.
Ira and Sarah were, you know, were willing to do it. And it turned into a great relationship. Jacob Hamlin, there's really good documentation that he married a Paiute woman, but he never had any children with her.
Yeah.
And if you don't have children, then people don't look at it as a real marriage, and so it's not as well known that he, married this Paiute woman.
Yeah.
Um, so some strange stories take place in southern Utah and
Yeah.
northern Arizona.
Yeah, definitely. I think
I was
it's
going to tell you my experience with legal documents. One of the women I wrote about, she ended up living in Los Angeles for a while,
uh-huh.
and during the gold rush, and her daughter was married a man in Los Angeles, and he kind of went bad and got irrationally jealous of her and started trying to kill people, and they ended up with a divorce. But they went into the court, and there were legal papers, and so I thought, gosh, I wonder if I could find those. So I went downtown LA. I found the place where I was supposed to go, and they actually had these legal papers from like 1850, and so they gave them to me. I was able to make a photocopy of them and took them home, and incredible, transcribed them. And the handwriting was really hard to read. It was this kind of special legal handwriting.
Oh yeah.
But it's fun when you can do that.
Yeah.
Find documents like that.
I had problems when I was doing my thesis. Arizona had I found out that there's court documents about Lot Smith, and they gave me a couple, but they didn't want to give me everything because there were too many documents and they didn't want to copy them all.
That's frustrating.
I said, well, just give me the ones dealing with this specifically and we'll go from there. But yeah. Well, I thank you very much for talking with me tonight. I had fun. I enjoy all of this.
Yeah.
And like I said, it deals with my family, so it kind of gets me excited about stuff too. And seeing what type of influence they had in history and whether it be positive or negative, but it's fun. I think it's fun.
Well, I love talking about this stuff too, so my pleasure. It's funny with my book, a lot of the people who like my book are descendants of Jacob Hamlin.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. And I'm, there's so much that's in my book that's kind of not the party line, that I'm glad they are able to look past that, and still accept the book. But I'm glad there is someone like you who looks at it from a different point of view,
Yeah. I was, I took your book to work one day because I knew one of my coworkers is a descendant of Jacob Hamlin. And I can't remember which wife she came from, but apparently whatever line she comes from, they're not they're not welcomed with open arms into the Jacob family reunions. They're kind of left out and shunned from the main group of the Hamlin family, and so that's pretty interesting. But yeah, I told her to go get your book and read it, and you'd find out anything you'd want to know about Jacob Hamlin through it. But
Right.
I'll let you go. Thank you very much. It was awesome. And,
Okay.
I'll talk to you later. And if
It was
you
a
have
lot
any
of fun.
questions about the stuff that I sent back to you, just let me know.
Okay.
I'll be glad to help out.
Yeah, and I need to send you a flash drive with some of my PDFs on it too sometimes. So.
Okay. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you, Todd.
Great talking to you, Corey.
You too. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.